Nourish My Soul is proud to present to you another episode of Radical Thursdays, where this week things are flipped. I'm actually sitting on the other side of the microphone as Bella and Kenya interview myself and Jason McQueenie as part of Resilience Grows Here, which is a partner program for Nourish My Soul, where we teach resilience in the schools to children of all ages, but this week we're focusing on discussing middle school and high school in particular and why it's so important to normalize those conversations and some little tips on how other adults can enter those conversations, as well as for our young people listening, our kind of words of advice and wisdom for you to hopefully hold on to during that turbulent time. So I hope you tune in. I hope you get something out of it. And I'd love to hear your feedback on it. Thank you.
So, welcome back to Radical Thursdays. On this episode, we discussed the organization Resilience Grows Here. RGH is an organization that focuses on the mental well-being of all people of all ages, ranging from young children to military veterans. We talked about the importance of addressing mental health from a young age and realizing the power that younger generations can have on older generations and changing the world. This episode was really eye-opening, and I encourage you to listen closely and take something away from it.
Can you tell us a little about yourselves?
Thank you. Okay, so I'll go first. Thank you, Alicia. A little bit about myself is my name is Jason. I've been in the Connecticut Air National Guard for almost 21 years. It'll be 21 years in April. I've been full-time and or active duty for 18 of those 20 years. For my personal time, I enjoy lifting, doing strongman, powerlifting, eating healthy. I definitely enjoy reading. I went back to school a couple of years ago. I'm now in the UConn psychology program at the Hartford campus, and I just got into that last year. This will be my third semester at UConn. I did a semester and a half at Capitol prior to that. And then I got involved with RGH and Alicia and Justine. What was it? Maybe 4 years ago. I got involved with you guys. 4 years ago was about that time. Totally by chance. They came to the base, to the Bradley Air National Guard base, and they were throwing a now fun term, which they called it, which definitely wasn't appropriate at the time, but it's kind of funny. It was called the sausage sizzle. And that was just basically them introducing themselves to the base, cooking sausage, essentially, eating them the Australian style, eating them the American style. And I just talked to Justine, who is incredibly charming and witty and funny and magnetic. And then, talked to the more quieter version of Justine, which is Alicia, and she is equally charming and witty and funny, just not as outspoken and loud. But they're the ones who essentially sucked me into volunteering initially with the base and helping veterans, and then that kind of just rolled into working in the schools at East Granby. Started at East Granby Middle School, and then some high school the next year, working with the students and being part of the program, which is truly an honor. I enjoy it. I've learned more from middle school kids than I have ever from adults in my life, more lessons from them, from 11-year-old girls than 41-year-old men. So it's definitely an experience that has changed me, given me different perspective, made me listen to the next generation's perspective a little bit more, things like that. So it's definitely opened my eyes. It's definitely changed my perspective and made me more open-minded to listening versus judging, and listening versus just being closed-minded and like I said, passing judgment on the next generation or 2 generations from now. So
You fly planes.
what was that?
Can you fly planes?
I cannot fly planes. I do not want to fly planes.
I'm a little. Okay, so before we leave this, sorry, Alicia, this brought up another question because I was just going to follow. I assumed, so I was going to follow up. What's your favorite plane? But so why did you choose the Air Force? Isn't that?
Oh, well, that's also an ironic story. So, so I chose the Army first. I was 18, fresh out of high school. I had a couple of college scholarship offers. They weren't full scholarship offers. Came from a lower middle class working family, blue collar. My dad was a cop. My mom was a therapist. So we didn't have a ton of money. So therefore college was on me. Couldn't pay for the whole thing, didn't really understand the whole student loan process. So I just decided to join the military. So I went down to the Army recruiter. I absolutely could not stand the guy. I tried to join an infantry unit, and I remember the guy's name was Jason because it was my name. And he was a total whatever. Use whatever 4-letter word you choose to use, or whatever derogatory term you choose to use. It was him. So I was like, forget that. I'm not going to do that. So then I ended up, I ditched the military as a whole, ended up moving in with a couple of friends from my job at Circuit City. If that doesn't age me, I don't know what does. Moved in with a couple of friends, we moved up to Willimantic, did the whole like party college thing without actually going to college, which is a really good time because you don't have any stress of school. And then about 20 years old, I just dreamt up, I didn't want to go back to duty because I enjoyed my life. So I was like, oh, I wonder if there's like an Air National Guard, since there's an Army National Guard. I actually didn't even know it existed. Looked it up in literally the phone book, which, further ages me, but looked it up in the phone book, and sure enough, there's an Air National Guard. I called the guy and my recruiter, and I was literally, I think it took like a couple of weeks. I did very well in the ASVAB. Unfortunately, I'm colorblind, so I didn't get the job that I wanted. Went off the basic, went off the technical training, came back, and that was it. So I essentially chose the Air Force out of a phone book. That's how I ended up there.
Huh.
Yeah.
So,
Nothing glorious at all. Initially I joined for the education. I wanted my whole goal. I went to a private school. I went to East Catholic. My parents paid for my education for that school, which is why they couldn't pay for my college education. So I was like, okay, well, the Air National Guard pays for school, so I'm going to do that. So I enrolled at Eastern, went there for a semester, and unfortunately, towards the end of the semester, 9/11 happened, and obviously changed the entire world and changed my life. So I kind of I really just decided to focus my entire existence on being in the military, and I pushed school, I ditched school. I just never went back. I never took advantage of any of the opportunities that were afforded me by serving, and until like I said, 3 years ago, and I finally went back 3 years. But yeah, really 9/11. I chose the military, my career over educating myself. So that's how I ended up here.
most people had a call to action around
Yeah.
9/11 and joined the military or different
Yep.
services. Well, that was interesting. Alicia, can you tell us a little about yourself?
I don't know if my story is going to be as interesting as Jason's, but I was a nutritionist in private practice for a long time, and then started a nonprofit, Nourish My Soul, because I felt inspired in order to change people and their habits and make them healthier. I needed to start with people before those habits formed. And so I focused on young people and working with them, getting them excited about healthy eating, which led to our youth leadership group, which is from the ground up. So I was working with high school students and doing community gardens and junior chef programming, which led me to meeting Justine, who worked for Farmington Valley Health District. And like Jason said, Justine is very dynamic, and just she's amazing to be around. And so we wanted to find a way to work together all the time because we really enjoyed being around each other and fed off each other's energy. So we have this really, it's very magical actually when we work together. And Jason just adds to that magic, I think, when he's in the room. But we decided this grant came up, and it was for mental health initiatives. So we kind of looked at what the mental health immediate need was in our area at the time, this was in 2014, 2015, somewhere around that time frame. And it was really military. So we have a very large military and veteran population in our area. And there was nothing really, no mental health initiatives happening. And with the suicide rate being so high with veterans, we decided that would be our focus. So we applied for the grant, and lo and behold, we got it. And so we were trying to merge her expertise as a nurse and community health organizer and mine with food, nutrition, and youth organizing. So we started off working at the base and then branched out into working with young people, because we realized that if we are going to help veterans, so the mission of RGH is supporting the mental health of veterans of all ages. So you're not born a veteran, you become a veteran. So you have to address mental health issues before a person actually becomes active duty military and veteran. So supporting them in that way, and then also their families, their children. So that was the thought process behind moving into the schools, is normalizing mental health conversations and making sure that people have a solid foundation before they get into situations where they're going to be facing trauma.
It's interesting that you bring up addressing mental health before it happens, because a couple podcasts ago when we had Above the Stigma on, he's a veteran himself, Joey, and we were talking about, because they started out their mental health or Above the Stigma to address veterans and mental health issues that come with it, from PTSD to anxiety, depression, and sometimes unfortunately suicide. And we were talking about how it's crazy that they don't have required mental health check-ins or required time with a psychiatrist or group therapy or something regularly, because you're in a stressful environment, regardless of whether you're overseas or not. But then he brought up the point, well, if that happened, a lot of people would unfortunately be discharged, which was interesting. So based on the grounds of them not being suited to properly handle, but who is really properly able to handle such stressful situation, Anyway, that's a side note.
Well, I mean, Jason can probably speak more to that, but I think what we were finding is the services are offered. There's people that actually have those positions on the base, correct, Jason?
Yes,
yeah, it's just a matter. Yeah, it's just a matter of there's no incentive for someone to come forward and potentially lose what they've worked so hard for.
Right. Benefits and stuff.
I mean, if you want to talk about this, we can talk about this, because I certainly have a perspective on it. So it's up to you.
Why not? Let's go for it.
Yeah. So like I said, I've been in for a little over 20 years, and I would say 75% of that time, there was never somebody on base, or at least the resource wasn't pushed out to us. It wasn't advertised to us, so there really wasn't anything on base. That kind of came within the last, I would say, 3 to 5 years. We did have psychological screening prior to it ranged. So it would be I deployed in 2011 Afghanistan, and before Afghanistan, you took I don't even know what the purpose of it was, but it was a psychological test. It was a measurement. It was a measuring stick. So they kind of set a baseline. It was a psychological test, and then when you come back, you take another psychological test along the same lines, and it kind of measures if there's been any change, if you if you dealt with any PTSD, if you dealt with some things that maybe you couldn't necessarily handle well, and that's what it was around, and that was fairly new. So I was back in 2011, and then even you have the yellow ribbon events where they talk about all the resources that you have, but once again, these events are like it's like in one ear and out the other for 99% of the service members, for many different cultural reasons, institutional reasons, personal reasons. We blow them off. We blew off the resources that we had. Most of them. Most people did blew off most of the resources. But it wasn't until really, honestly, it really wasn't until RGH, maybe a year or two before RGH came on base, that people even spoke of any sort of mental health, which is obviously a super vague term. But it really wasn't a thing. It just wasn't a thing. And then, obviously when you look at a mental health program, you have to look at the structure of the program, who's involved with the program, the quality of the service that they're providing. And to be, I hate to say it, but the quality of service just wasn't that good. And that's why RGH was really special to us coming on base, because it was a civilian entity that you could use that had no reporting back to your chain of command. And that was huge for people, because there's certain depression medications or anxiety medications that you're on, that if you're prescribed that, you're medically discharged. There's a process to it, because you have to identify all the medications that you take, to the medical unit, especially if you deploy, because you usually have to deploy with 6 months worth of that medication. So you have to provide that information. So if there's certain medications, they were like, you basically got flagged, and you went in front of a medical examination board, which, goes all the way down to Washington, DC. They send your file, and then some secret group in DC, medical people, they decide your fate. And, if it came back to where they felt you couldn't serve, or you were unstable to serve, you were medically discharged. So that's how it was. So that's why RGH coming on base. And that's why, the more time I spent with Alicia and Justine, the more I realized the value. Me personally, I've never, I don't want to say never, because I definitely have, but, I've never, really suffered, biologically with, any sort of depression or anxiety like that. I'm not an anxious person. Obviously, I think, at some point in life, we've all been situationally depressed, but nothing that would, cause me to take any medication. And, but I feel bad for people that do, and all they want to do is serve. You don't want to do anything different. You don't want to be different. You don't want to be treated differently. You just want to serve. And unfortunately, you have this condition that you're not responsible for, and you're not, and I mean causing, you just have it. No different than having blue eyes, or a shaved head. It's definitely not my choice, but so it's like it just sucks. And that's why RGH I thought was so cool, and I really wanted to be involved with them, is because they gave that third party outlet to the people at the base. And I wanted to be a part of that. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't force people, but I could talk about it amongst my peers and make it more common to just talk about, mental health and getting help if you need it, and not being ashamed, because that is absolutely has been my entire career. The culture in the military is just not talking about it. And, the military, coined a term, embrace the suck, for a reason, because that's essentially what we do. Like anything that sucks, you just suck it up, you deal with it. You don't necessarily talk about it. You may talk about it amongst your peers and your friends and your colleagues, but you don't talk about it to anyone else. So it's been that was like that changed the game for us in the Connecticut Air National Guard. So
Right. Yeah, I think one thing that RGH does that's really awesome, and how you talked a little about it, Jason, but that external, like that disconnect between what happens on base and what happens in real life. Mm-hmm. And I think another big aspect, I don't know from personal experience, but also deals with the masculine or toxic masculinity for sure. And addressing mental health is hard for men because of the cultural stigma around it. Yeah. And then also being a veteran on top of that. And so how RGH just comes in and kind of addresses I would consider, I mean, everyone struggles with mental health, but I would consider veterans and young people kind of the two groups that struggle with it most. I
Yeah.
mean, everyone struggles with it in varying degrees, but so RGH has now transitioned into working with high school students and middle school students and doing those school programs. Can you guys talk a little bit about those programs?
I can talk a little bit about that. So I write the curriculum, and it was basically the whole purpose is to get young people having conversations and seeing things in a different way. But my philosophy when working with young people is always to throw an idea out there, but to allow the young people to take that and run with it and come up with their own concepts, which is, like Jason had said in the beginning, we learn more from them than if I spoon fed the information that I thought that I wanted them to get out of it, or the way I wanted the conversation to go. It's so much better to just put something out there. We usually have like an activity to kind of get them thinking about things, but they always take it in a direction that I am not expecting. And we always have like these completely inspiring aha moments with young people. I'm drawing a blank to come up with an example, Jason. I don't know if you can come up with one, but um, it's so cool to see like a group of we get an entire grade at a time. Actually, last year we played with doing it in smaller groups, but I prefer to have them all in together. So the school that we started with in East Granby, there's really only like 50 to 70 kids per grade. So it's still a relatively small group when you're talking about an entire grade for a class. But we have this large group of kids in the room, and they're all kind of throwing out ideas and concepts about mental health. And that alone, just being able to talk in front of your peers about something that has been stigmatized, I think is huge, because then they're taking that at a young age. It's becoming normalized that they can talk about these things and there's no judgment. And then these kids are moving through some pretty tough years. You know, middle school and high school is pretty tough. You're growing and emotionally and facing things that you have no reference point for. So I think that alone is really spectacular. But then having, as an adult in the room and hearing a different perspective for the first time when the young people come forward with their thoughts and ideas is amazing. And, you know, we've done things as heavy as, you know, we have conversations about suicide, and they talk about it openly, about whether or not they've contemplated suicide, whether or not they've had a loved one that's attempted suicide. And they do that in front of their peers. I know when I was in middle school, there was no way I was going to say in front of 50 or 60 of my peers that I had thought about committing suicide. You know, like that's not something that I would have ever felt comfortable doing. So the fact that we're able to get to that point with them is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
Would you guys say that, at least for the when you work with youth in the middle school and whatnot, you are there more for a sounding board purposes than just like, I don't know, like constructive methods to deal? Or would you say you're more sounding board, and then when you figure out what they're kind of throwing at you, then you tell them kind of some ways to handle and deal?
Why don't you take that, Jason?
Okay. So I don't necessarily think that. I would actually say it'd be the other way around. I think that when we teach one of Alicia's curriculum, it's we present. I feel like the structure of it is we present something to them. We give we allow them to not necessarily be a sounding board but to give their perspective and how they feel, and then we give them ways to handle it, alternative ways to handle it. It's like an education. So, and I think at times that turns into a sounding board. I don't correct me if I'm wrong, Alicia, but I don't feel like we are in the group setting, the larger group setting. By that I mean 60 to 80 kids. That there's really much of a sounding board individually. I think maybe as a whole, maybe, but not individually. That sometimes happens, later on in the smaller group settings, but we certainly, I feel like the curriculum is designed very well to the point where it is like, hey, here's something that you guys wish you wanted to, wish to talk about. So here's the information on it. This is kind of like, ways to deal with it, ways to cope with it, how to cope with it, what's okay, what's not okay. But I think the important thing that, Alicia said was, the conversation is even had. I never had these conversations until I was like in my 30s with people, never mind being a middle schooler. This is just was not, the things that we talk about are legitimate. I think a lot of things that we talk about need to be talked about with adults in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. Like, it's crazy how intelligent these kids are. They may not be great at math, but these kids have like some pretty decent, wisdom for how old they are. I think it could be, bestowed upon some adults for sure. But, as far as being a sounding board, I think I think it's more of like a, an education, and then we turn into a sounding board. But that's how I feel. That's what I've seen.
And we usually have like a fun activity. So it's not like a lecture style. There's always a fun activity that I try to design so that it's presenting something that in a way that they may have never thought about. So like teamwork, like when the kids have like a group project per se, right? And someone's not upholding their end of the team part of the work, or like everyone has a different role to play. We do a team project together, and then we give everyone a handicap. So then they talk about what it was like to work with someone with that handicap. Like for instance, someone isn't allowed to take the direction or advice of another person on their team, or someone's not allowed to, I can't think of the lesson on the top of my head, but there's different things that they are or not allowed to do. And then we talk about how that impacted the group as a whole and how they felt when someone wasn't doing what they asked, because they don't know what the other person's role is in that. So it's just things like that. But then the conversation gets really deep really quickly. It's a very simple activity, and it takes 10 minutes or less, but the idea is driven home through that, and they take what they want from it. It's not being spoon fed to them. We present an activity that they take and they run with, or we have some groups that don't want to participate. They're middle school, can't make them, but then we talk about that, right? Like, so what was it like for you to watch everyone else have a good time and try and work through this, and you just sat and didn't participate? Like, what was that like, and why'd that happen? I don't know, there's some great conversations that come out of just the simplest activities.
Yeah, I think the approach of just kind of like throwing it out there and letting the students kind of take it how they want and like steer the direction kind of is very valuable. And I think like we, especially with From the Ground Up, it's seen a lot, but it's like also with this podcast, just the idea of just because we're younger doesn't necessarily mean that we don't offer anything valuable and that we won't get it until we're 30 or 40, but that we just have different experiences and that we approach different things in different ways. And I think everyone can benefit from that. And it goes both ways. Like I can benefit from someone older than me just the same amount as someone older than me can benefit from what I have to offer. So how have you seen kind of that empowerment change the lives of the students?
Well, I have a favorite story that actually involves Jason.
Oh boy.
So this is just one example. But think of this on a larger scale. But this was a very special moment, I think, for RGH, because it was in the first year. And so it was kind of an experimental phase where we didn't know what to expect. We just had this great idea. And in the very first class, I think it was, Jason made an effort to connect with a young boy that was very disconnected from social group settings. He would kind of sit in the back corner, curled up, sometimes crying, did not want to engage in any way, shape, or form. And just having this, so you guys can't see Jason right now. I mean, we can because we're on the video, but those listening can't see him. And he is a very large, like he said, he enjoys lifting, very large, intimidating looking bald man. And so and military to boot. So to have him kind of take that extra time to connect with this young boy, and lift him up, encourage him that his thoughts were important. I think it was that one class, Jason, where you were getting him to share some ideas that went well. Yeah. By the end of that year, this boy who did not socially engage whatsoever, just by coming together once a month with RGH and having these conversations, he slowly started moving into the group. And then one of our last classes, he stood up and shared something so profound in front of the entire group. Everyone clapped and cheered, and teachers were crying. Like, it was incredible to see the growth of that young man in that year.
It really was. And that kid in the subsequent years after that, that kid has dropped some of the most like intelligent answers. Like, we'd ask a question and just the whole crowd would be silent for 10 or 15 seconds, and he would just raise his hand and answer. I mean, that kid was a diamond in the rough. And to think that he was just sat in the back, and really all it took was a conversation. We just talked about dinosaurs. We talked about Jurassic Park, the new movie that was coming out, and we just talked, and then it just happened. But that kid consistently drops like intelligent answers with inspirations of wisdom in them. It's crazy. Yeah, he's a good kid for sure.
And then to think, like, so the perspective from his peers too, when he went from being kind of thought as being like that oddball and didn't engage, to now his peers have this deep respect for him and listen when he speaks and clap, and like, that's going to do amazing things for his future.
I feel like in the past probably 5 to 3 years, kind of similar with your timeline, Jason, of the change in, at least at your base, in terms of mental health, there's been like a cultural like revolution, might I say. That might be a little bold of me to say, but in terms of normalizing mental health, at least when Kenya and I were going through school, we, at least for me, Kenya, I'm speaking about me now, you can agree or not, but there wasn't really mental health, I guess, information or education, definitely not to the extent that you guys are doing in schools, especially during that awkward middle school phase where, some people are going through puberty, emotions are flying high, the drama is crazy, kids are crying in the bathroom at dances. We had, what was that class that we had to take, Kenya, that was like one semester in 8th grade, and it was like
Rico?
Yeah.
Character development. No, character development.
We had character development, but man, that was nothing. So I think it's great. I'm especially at this time period, having people kind of go in there, an outside source that you can kind of rely on and kind of bounce ideas and express yourself at a young age.
Yeah, what Granby did was, I would say I saw a change. I think it was our sophomore year, when they did the NCCJ Bridges program, because I was one of the students. It was like 20 of us or so, but that was like it was 3 days of just of us in a room, like for 8 hours, just talking about different problems that students go through: cultural, mental, social, religious, like academic, just all a bunch of different issues. And I remember at the end, someone said, they were like, I would have never thought that this was happening with like everyone, like this was a student-wide problem. I just thought it was me. And so I would say kind of with the introduction of that program into our high school, a lot of stuff just started being spoken about finally. But yeah, I was before that, there definitely wasn't anything that I
But
would
then,
say.
so you said 20 students?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
it
was
wasn't
a small group.
whatsoever.
Granby.
Everyone else would just cry in the library as we were studying.
I don't
Maybe
think
that
it
was
can
just me.
be effective. So part of RGH's philosophy is that it is not effective unless every single, so we require staff to be present as well. That is the principal, superintendent, like every staff member involved in the school system has to be present in our sessions. So every teacher that the students come across in that grade have to be there, as well as the principal, if the superintendent can be there. And then, you know, for the next grade that comes in, same thing, like all of their teachers, all the staff that interact with them. Because I think that's the key, is to having everyone on the same page. If you just take a handful of students and you educate them, that's great for those students, but that doesn't change the culture of a school.
100%. Now let me ask you this: when you have all those, I was about to say old people. That's probably that's probably a little disrespectful because some of them are maybe young, adults rather, guiding people in children's lives. There we go. In the room, do you have them sitting on the floor mixed in with the children, or are they on the wall like they always are when they're in like assemblies and stuff like that? Outside looking in on the fishbowl, you know what I mean?
I'll take this one because this is kind of a source of frustration at times for me. So I think with anything else, any other large group, you have your introverts, your extroverts, or some variation of all those things, and teachers are no different. So there's some teachers, some that you would never expect are like in the mix, with some crayons, with some scissors, helping out the kids. And then there's some that literally don't get out of their seat, and you literally want to walk up to them and like drag them by their ponytail into the group to mix with the kids, because it's very frustrating to see, like Alicia said, the program, like the curriculum that Alicia put together, I think is absolutely phenomenal. And I think it, like I said, it applies to adults, because adults our age have never been taught some of these things. If it weren't for life and maybe figuring it out yourself, there was nothing like this for us. So these kids, these lessons that we're teaching them apply to every human being of every age. And these closed-minded people who don't are just really doing themselves, their family, and everyone who's around them, their students, a disservice. And then the teachers or the principal or the vice principal or the school psychologist that jump in and help and like get in with the kids, they're showing the kids like, hey, this is it. This is where it's at. This is what we're doing. This is worthwhile. If you're paying attention, I'm paying attention, it allows the kids to buy in even more, because the quote unquote, the authority figure, the teacher, we all know how it is. You girls are in college, I'm in college. You look at the dean of the college and you're like, wow, this guy's essentially that's what the principal is to them. Like, wow, this guy or this woman is in the mix with me, doing this with me. It's like you just buy in a little bit more. You're a little bit more willing to listen and accept what's happening and be open to the things that you're learning, versus that one woman that Alicia knows what I'm talking about, that just sits in the chair, and it infuriates me every time.
A scowl on her face.
Scowl on her face, disinterested, on her phone. And I'm like, oh, and I'm in my mind, I'm like, she's the one, more than these kids, she's the one who needs this more than anybody, out of anybody in the whole room. But there you go. There's the answer.
You just brought up my pet peeve. Remember, I hate when like the head or whoever's like the person or of higher authority in a room, when it comes to whatever it may be, is on their phone the entire time. Mm-hmm. Fine. Do extend a quick message if something's of that important. I don't care. But if you're on your phone and not, oh my goodness. Like, remember when we were at the Building on Success meeting, and then the president or whatever his name was there, and he was at that table with the other people on the board, sitting there, and I could not stop staring him down because I was so pissed that he was sitting there while his people are presenting how to better people, like these organizations, on his phone. I'm like, if you want to better your organization, better start looking like you're a better organization, because you don't look like that to me. That's so unprofessional, in my opinion. I was mad. I still am mad.
You're mad. You tell them why you're mad.
Oh, you lose my respect instantly if you're one of those people. I'm like, come on now.
Well, that's a prerequisite before we start in any school, is that we have to know that from the bare minimum, the superintendent and the principal of every school have 100% buy-in, and they're going to be there, and they're going to be excited, and they're going to be the ones kind of role modeling the expectation for the rest of the school.
Exactly.
And so far that's been the case. It's just, you know, the one person that we've had some frustration with is a teacher, and there's other than her being reminded that she should be participating, there's not a whole lot that we can do. And like Jason said, she's the one that's missing out. But it's very rare. Like once we usually get rolling and the teachers see the value in it, they become more engaged and they loosen up a little bit. Some of them, I think it's hard because they see themselves as, you know, they're supposed to be
Students
that like,
yeah,
they're supposed, they're supposed to be above, right? Like, and they're supposed to be a role model, and it's hard for them to let down that guard and kind of get silly or like do fun stuff with the kids. Not all of them. There's just it's a handful of them that have trouble with that. So I give them grace and, you know, give them a little room to kind of loosen up. But that one in particular, it just wasn't happening. I mean, 3 years later and she was still doing the same thing. So.
So how has it been? So how were you able, because the whole school district is involved. So how are you able to get the superintendent, the principal, all the teachers on board? And do you kind of have an inkling as to why it hasn't been able to happen in Granby?
Well, you guys just started in Granby, no? Right before the pandemic hit, and
we were supposed to start. We were supposed to start before the pandemic hit, but then the pandemic hit, and so like I had said earlier, Justine works for the health department, and obviously right now she's a little preoccupied. So this was the pandemic hit just as we were rolling out a teach the teacher model. So we hadn't quite finished it yet, but the goal was so that we could train others to run the program in schools. So it's not just us, because there's only so much time in a day that we can be doing it. So because that hasn't happened yet, we're kind of waiting on things to quiet down a little bit so Justine can have a little more balance in her life again. And then we can focus on this. But yeah, Granby is supposed to be rolling it out. It's been a little bit more of a struggle. They are open to it now because parents have seen the success in the surrounding towns. So we are in 2 surrounding towns of Granby. And they started demanding it. And we had a new superintendent step in who came from one of the other towns that we service. And so he saw the success of it. And he hadn't worked, he was an assistant superintendent, so he hadn't worked directly with us, but he definitely knew about the program and saw the success of it. And so he was willing to bring it in. But again, he and the other staff at Granby is a little more difficult to get them to be that hands-on and to have a systemic change. And that's not to say that every single staff member is like that, but it is a little bit of a more difficult culture to kind of break into. I think because it was managed by a superintendent who encouraged that type of behavior for so long. And so it's kind of ingrained. So we just need some undoing to do.
I think that fact alone kind of highlights the fact that the educational institution as a whole really needs to change. Because you have, through, middle school, I mean, through all of your school, from kindergarten to your senior year of college, you're taught English, you're taught a language, you're taught a math, you're taught a science, you're taught an English, you're taught, sociology and psychology, all those things like that. And all that is awesome. Psychology and sociology for an engineer, maybe not so awesome, going through college and things like that. But like, there needs to be a place whether it be middle school, high school, probably middle school and high school, for that period of 6 years or 7 years, there needs to be a place, nationally in the education system where a program like this has been implanted, because really at the end of the day, it's about resilience. It's about resilience. It's about all of the big things that we deal with sociologically now, in America and all over the world, whether it be suicide, drugs, sexual harassment, sexual abuse or anything like that, sexual assault, resilience, anxiety, depression, all the things that we just deal with. And no one in the schools, there's no class, there's no fundamental class, I should say, no curriculum that teaches these things about how to deal with it, how to overcome it, how to be resilient. Talking is okay. And if you, like you said, you had like a 20-person class for 3 days, right? Did I hear you correctly when you said that? Right. So 20 people for 3 days is legit. That's cool. That's like a let's open the door. But like, really, there needs to be a class, like a science, like a math, that you go to for 7 years, every day, every school day for 7 years, that teaches you about these things. And so that it's ingrained in you, it becomes part of your, educational DNA. And I think that, like, I'm hoping that as these old curmudgeons that are in the educational institution now, as they leave and start, younger, more open, more forward thinking people take over their positions, and have been exposed to these types of topics in this type of education, I hope they change. I hope they change the educational system, because at the end of the day, like, yeah, like math is cool, but like, I'm a psychology major. I don't care about math. I really genuinely don't. You know what I mean? But what would help me is like resilience. What would help me is like learning about like a female perspective, or the perspective of someone from a different racial or cultural background, someone learning from this, perspective helps. All of those things help. Whereas like what I want to do with my life, I don't care about certain things. I just do it to do it. And I think that's, these types of curriculum need to be in schools all over really all over the world, but all over this country, so that kids can learn that these things are okay. Curriculum, teaching resilience is really is what's going to stick with you for the rest of your life. That's just my two.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off some of what you were talking about, Jason, the whole like sexual assault, that type of thing. Do you remember the day that we went into the high school and we were talking about, it was basically like, let's talk about sex, and identity. And, we didn't have an agenda other than let's open up the conversation. These are high school students, like, let's have the conversation. And at first it was really hard for them to have a serious conversation, and not all of them were willing to go there, and that's fine. But there was like a magic moment when, because this was in the throes of the Me Too movement that we had this class. And one gentleman,
Ooh, that was tough.
that was a tense moment. One gentleman voiced his confusion about it. He was I don't know if they were freshman or sophomore.
I think he was a sophomore. I can actually picture his face, because that was like that was a moment in my life. Yeah.
It was a tough, intense moment. So in front of all of it, I think it was freshman and sophomore together, actually.
Yes.
So we had double class. And he bravely, I mean, it took a lot of guts to say that in that group, but he voiced his confusion about, well, if a girl doesn't want to continue, why doesn't she just leave? And almost the entire room was ready to physically assault him. And I, put a stop to it. I was like, okay, let's like drill down, get to the meaning of what he's saying. And then, have someone respond respectfully, which a young woman stood up and responded better than I could have ever responded to that. Like she had it down, she had it nailed. And like that conversation wouldn't have happened for him anywhere else. And can you imagine what that young man, like holding on to that confusion and not understanding, and like what that could have potentially led to in his life? Like, These conversations are so necessary to have.
Well, yeah, it was, I I don't want to be like, dramatic or anything, but that was like, and really it was he was, like you said, it was when he first asked the question, and the question really went along the lines of, I think his question was along the lines of like, I think he said something about if you're, in your bed making out with your girlfriend and, watching a movie, and then one thing happens, one thing leads to another, and she just doesn't want to, like, then she should just leave, or should she leave, or something along like that. It was a very, I thought it was, obviously, I'm much older. I've had, plenty of experience in life. I thought he was, I thought he was joking. I thought he was making a mockery of it. And when I realized, like, on his face, that he was genuinely confused that a woman or a girl, your girlfriend, could just not want to in that moment, but it's still all good. You're still boyfriend and girlfriend. Doesn't mean she hates you. He just didn't understand that. But once again, the way he presented it, like Alicia said, like literally the whole room erupted, and it was like, for like a good 10 seconds, it was like pandemonium, and I was like, holy shit, like this is not good. And then, like Alicia said, we calmed everybody down, and and that's the thing about, RGH, is that everybody, no matter how ridiculous the question is, and this is probably the most ridiculous question that I've ever heard so far, but it was so important to be asked, because we have no idea. And once again, like Alicia said, the level of bravery it took for that kid to step up and ask that question in front of all those people. And he genuinely did not understand that this was possible, and that it's okay to just not want to have sex. But I still like you, I still love you, I still whatever, I still want to, I just don't want to right now. And it's all good, and you can just go back to, Netflixing and not chilling. You know what I mean? So it's like, it was like a huge, profound moment. And then, yeah, like I said, not to be dramatic, but we may have potentially, saved some poor woman a horrible experience, and him going to jail for a very long time, because he just genuinely didn't understand. Genuinely.
Yeah, I think that brings up a pretty good point. I mean, especially now with everything being so like charged, whether it be like for political purposes or what have you, it's hard to find a safe space. So for some people, they may not have that perspective because they're not, they aren't that gender, or they aren't in that class in terms of, or maturity hasn't grown yet, or what have you. But it's hard to find a safe space. And as much as it's so hard to like find that calmness when approaching situations that can be educational, I think it's incredibly important to have those conversations in a way that's solely educational, and not like attacking and strangling the person, whether it be if they have like low-key, high-key racist comment or question, or whether it be in the nature of sexual assault and stuff like that, like you guys had. I think it's really important to have those learning moments, especially when you're younger and you haven't experienced those things necessarily yet, but you've been exposed to it through the media, and it's been normalized through the media. So definitely a good thing to have. And I think tying back to earlier and having, wanting that on a more national scale, a similar thing that RGH is doing. Yeah, I hope so, because there is a big disconnect between, administrative staff in the schooling system and people that work directly with children. There's a huge disconnect. The only time you have them exposed to what's happening in classrooms is when they come visit maybe once or twice a year, and they sit in the back of the class, and the teacher tells you that they're coming before, and to be on your best behavior, what have you, and just answer their question quietly. And so, yeah, I think there needs to be that more united front. And I hate to be well, I don't really hate to be political, to be honest, but I think it's great that Joe Biden has nominated, rather, I guess, because he's not confirmed into the seat yet, Miguel Cardona. I hope I'm saying everything correctly. Who ironically is was a Connecticut teacher for a long time, then went up to the principal, and then, so on and so forth, and now has been nominated to this position of, Secretary of Education, I believe it is. Because hopefully change will happen because he did work with that younger population, and he was able to have more of a connection to what's really happening in the education system. So ideally in the next couple of years, we'll see that change, and especially with the movement of mental health in general coming about. But yeah, full circle, hopefully.
Yeah, I've noticed a big change. Okay, not big, but I've noticed a change as I am an education major, and we've like through different some of my classes that we've had, it's being brought up more now than I think that it was in past years, and addressing all of those different aspects to a person's life, like it so, like which includes mental, so not just academic, not just cultural, not just political, but including mental health and all of those different aspects. And so I think there is starting to be a change for sure. I mean, it still obviously has a long way to go, but I hope that as like then as new teachers, like you said, as new teachers are starting to take positions that they are, um, because I think a big difference now versus back back then, I guess, is that we are now more vocal and that we have been given the opportunity to speak more on these certain topics and just speak up more. And so we are able to take those conversations, those small conversations that we've had over the years, and to combine them and now learn what we want to teach our students versus how we know that we definitely don't want to run our classroom. And so I was talking to one of my friends, I was talking to Steph, who was on a couple episodes ago, about just different ways that we want to implement those different practices, especially with mental health, because we're early childhood. So implementing them from kindergarten, like right off the bat, so that students aren't in the position that they are today, where it's just kind of like, life sucks, shit happens, you die, kind of. And so just kind of we've been given this voice over the years minimally, to change. And so I hope that now that as we are increasing power, I guess, for lack of better words, that we are able to really start to see a change in that way.
Yeah, I hope so too. And I mean, really, at the end of the day, you're the one in the position you're in now as a education major. Like, you're the one who might be in charge of changing it. It's hopefully it changes before you get there, but you're the one who needs to be the voice of change because you've seen change. And I think, like you said, like nothing is ever going to change without a conversation. Race relations won't change. The socioeconomic disparity that we have in this country will never change. Education won't change for the better until it's front and center. All the stigmas about mental health and depression, all those things, it'll never change until it's front and center and you talk about it, and people are willing to listen. It's just never going to change. And I hope now that we're talking about it and people are listening and people are being more open-minded, and we're kind of raising what I feel is a more open-minded society to some degree, about certain things, that things will change for the education system.
I just came up with a food connection through mental health. Well, outside of your lunch programs and whatnot. So this is kind of like a little string of connections, rather. For people in situations where you're not getting the amount of nutrition you need, you might develop nutritional deficiencies, which, if you didn't know, can impact your mental well-being and can cause depression or anxiety in some cases. And if it's not rather the cause, it can be the here, let's think about it like this. So everyone has DNA and genes and whatnot, as we all know. Obviously, we're made up of that. A lot of people are predisposed to mental health issues, like Jason had mentioned earlier. And a lot of times those mental health issues, so you may never experience to the extent that may be pre-programmed in your genes. But certain things in your life may turn on the light switch in a way to cause those issues to come to the forefront. And so you may never have it, but it's in your genes. So if you have nutritional deficiencies, you may turn on that light switch, causing those things. So that ties into mental health and addressing it and dealing with it through a wellness situation and talking about, proper nutrition in these programs and whatnot. So there's my full circle connection.
I'm going to
Thank you
add to
very
that,
much.
Bella. That
Thank you
was
very
very good. So yes, and actually there have been studies that have proven, there's a fascinating study that was done in prisons where they switched prisoners to whole foods diets, and the level of violence and mental health issues like disappeared. So it 100%, it's your diet forms every cell in your being. It predicts how you're going to react to things. Like if you think about it just from a very simplistic, we all understand like sugar highs and lows and what that does. And if your sugar drops too low and you become hangry, right? So on a grand scale, if you're eating a highly processed diet without a lot of whole foods of fruits and vegetables and whole grains and all that, then yeah, your body's not getting what it needs and you're not going to be behaving your best. There's going to be more tendency towards violent outbreaks.
Do you guys have lunch programs before we?
Does RGH have lunch programs?
Yeah, Kenny wrote down lunch programs. So
No, I was saying the East Granby lunch program.
Well, actually, RGH started a program to be able to continue the conversations with kids that maybe are struggling with a certain topic that we have. We will come into the school
lunch
during lunch, and I usually bring something because, like Kenya was mentioning, East Granby does not have a lunch program. So I started bringing in food to share with the kids and also to lure them to come join me. But yeah, it was amazing to me how many kids would come in without having had breakfast or lunch and no way to access lunch because there was no lunch program. So that prompted me to start bringing in more food. But yeah, so continuing the conversation with the kids that needed to dive deeper into a monthly topic and then doing it in a way where we're also sharing food makes it
all the better.
Scary, yeah.
Have there been any collaborations that you've done with either, so Alicia, have you pulled for your curriculum? Have you pulled from any other programs that you've seen, or?
Yeah, has inspiration struck from seeing a different program and incorporate some of it, but not all of it. But
when we first started talking about doing it in the schools and writing this curriculum, I did. So Justine's from Australia, and they have actually a very robust mental health program in schools there, and it's called Beyond Blue. And so she shared that curriculum with me to just kind of look at and get, a feel for what they do there, because that is a successful program. But to be really honest, I find that I do my most creative work when I have like a blank slate, like when I can look at something and I examine, okay, what is the outcome I want to get from this session? Like, what am I trying to teach them? And what would be a fun way to make that happen? So I do research tips and ideas to give, because with each lesson, we also give tips and ideas for parents and for staff members working with kids. So that I would say I kind of pull from research, not from any one particular place, but the actual lesson, I tend to do completely on my own, because I become less creative if I start seeing other people's ideas.
I feel that.
You're just a creative genius.
Yeah. I mean, like, I feel that. I feel like you might, when you like look too much into other people, you might have a tendency to just copy and paste, and you don't really adapt it to what you need. At the same time, I'm one of those people. I mean, with my whole little pamphlets and stuff like that, I need to know everything and be prepared for everything. If I don't know everything that I have access to, or I can have access to, I would be a nervous wreck going into that. I would not know where to start. I'd be all over the place. So props to you for your creativity. Like, do you guys have advice for adults wanting to work with children, and then just the general like youth population in general? From your wisdom, looking in on them.
Would you, well, so, okay. So obviously, my perspective differs a little bit from Alicia's, because she does a lot more work than I do. So for me, obviously you know, being previously like very closed-minded, very shut off, very standoffish, especially, towards like kids that are even college kids and below. I was just very like annoyed. I really didn't have a good reason. So I think that my advice for adults that want to work with children are really, at the end of the day, they need to shut their mouth and open their ears and just hear what somebody else has to say other than themselves. Just because you're older does not mean you have more wisdom. All that means is you've lived more years. Just because you're older doesn't make you smarter. Just because you're older doesn't make you any better than anyone else in this world. It just makes you older. Not, being an adult, quote unquote, an adult, because I'm certainly not much of an adult. And being surrounded by other people that are, perceived to be adults. Like, there's a lot of really stupid adults out there, and these are like supposed to be like smart adults, and there's dumb, emotionally dumb, just dumb. And it's like, and I'm like, man, like they're once again, with my experiences with RGH, I'm like, there are like 11th graders and 8th graders and 6th graders that are smarter than you. So I think that as an adult, if you want to work with children, shut your mouth, open your ears, let them speak, and just really listen. Just listen. You don't even have to give your perspective. You don't have to give your, quote unquote, what you think your wisdom is. Just listen to what someone else besides your own brain has to say, and then digest it, because you may get more out of it than you intended, which is what happened to me. So that's my advice.
Yeah. To add to that, on a semi side note, when you are listening to people that are younger than you, and it may be one of those situations where you need to give advice or correct something, you have to, while you're listening, kind of gather where they are at in their lifetime and where their perspective is at. Because sometimes this goes back to the people that you're talking about, when in your groups they would not want to participate. Sometimes people are just not there yet, whether it be from their perspective hasn't grown to that place yet, their maturity, their exposure to something. Sometimes people are just not ready to hear it, and they need to go through the phases to get there. And so just keep that in mind, and listen for context clues that will lead you as to where you should kind of talk, and when you should talk, and how you should talk.
Exactly. And that's okay. Like, if you're not there, it took me like 30 something years to get there, to even be open-minded and listen to people. So I get it. Like, I'm one of those people that I refer to, like you said, and that's fine. That's fine.
Everyone's on a different path, and that's, totally fine.
Yep.
Alicia, got any advice?
I do. I think my biggest advice is to, before you go into a setting where you want to work with youth, really check the power dynamics. So make sure that you are not walking into a situation thinking that you are superior to anyone else in the room, or that young people need to like shut up and listen to you or answer to you, or that you have any higher up perspective. Like Jason was saying, that you go in to listen and know that you're probably going to learn more from them than they are from you. So be humble. And again, like, keep checking that power dynamic, because I think if you even hold on to the tiniest bit of feeling like you are an authority figure in that situation, young people they're going to sniff it out, and they are not going to participate. They are not going to give you the time of day. It's just not going to work. It's not going to be a give and take dynamic. So that is the biggest piece of advice that I can give. I think whenever I walk into a space with young people, I actually go into it thinking in my head, like, what can I learn from them today? Not what am I going to teach them, but what can I learn from them?
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, it's a good perspective.
Yeah, and if you come into that room with that mindset, you might put yourself into a huge cycle of this constant distaste for people that are younger than you. Because if you go into that and you have that kind of attitude, people are going to throw that attitude right back at you, especially as high schoolers and middle schoolers. Those kids have no remorse, especially middle schoolers. They will just tell it to you how it is. They're so sassy. But and you're not going to have a good experience. And then you're going to have this like anger towards, or just like general like dislike again. And it's just going to be, a cycle. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, you're going to perpetuate your own cycle, and then you're going to have, now you're going to have a confirmation bias, and you're going to be like, well, I told you so.
Exactly.
But really, yeah, at the end of the day, it started with your own attitude that could have changed everything.
Mm-hmm. Now, advice for people that are young and growing up. Any got any of that? Having grown up yourselves?
So,
or having growing up yourselves. You're not quite. We're never growing up or grown up completely, until we die, of course. But, that's a bit morbid.
That's okay. All right. So, advice. I'm sorry. Ask again. What was that? You lost me.
Advice for people going through, middle school, high school, college, even younger than that.
Oh my God. The number one thing, it all ends. Like it all ends. Like middle school ends, high school ends, and when high school ends and you go to wherever you go to college, it could still be, whether you don't go to college, you join the military, you go to the workforce, you go stay in Connecticut, or you go out whatever you do, you literally have a choice to speak to or to not to speak to any of those people ever again for the rest of your life. It all comes to an end. If you can, if you're having a hard time, just excuse my language, but just fucking hold on. Just hold on until you graduate, and then, blow them a peace sign, and then go live your life. Go do what you want to go do. Go be you, be unique. You don't have to conform to anything. And you may come into college or whatever you do, the military, and then obviously you have to conform to certain things, certain rules there. But I feel like the world and society has become, so much more open-minded than it used to be. It's not where we need to be, but it's open-minded to where much more than it used to be. You can be literally whatever, whoever, blank slate, whatever you want to be. Just get out of college, get out of your hometown, whatever you got to do. It just gets so much better. Life truly becomes very, very enjoyable when you get out of high school. At least that's my experience. I had a good time in high school. I had great friends, did a lot of cool things, had a lot of fun, but there's so much life waiting. Just get through it and you'll be okay. You'll be fine. You'll have a good time.
Kenya was like that. She was like, high school's ended. Peace out, Girl Scouts. Never talking to you again. And I kind of followed suit in that after a while. But yeah, 100%. Alicia?
Yeah, I think, I echo everything that Jason said, literally. And actually, to bring Justine back into the conversation, one of her favorite things to say is, whenever there's a storm going on around you, you just find something sturdy to hold on to. Maybe it's a friend's hand, and just let the storm go. Eventually it'll stop. But also, I think it's important for young people to not lose themselves. It's really, really easy to feel like you have to do things a certain way because society tells you, or because your peers are telling you, or just whatever it is that you have in your head that you're supposed to be, do, act as, accomplish, whatever it is. But really take some time to get to know yourself and know what your values are and what's important to you, and stick true to that as best you can. Because I think you'll come out of it a lot stronger, way farther ahead than everybody else. It might suck while you're in that storm. It might feel terrible, but I promise you that every middle school and high schooler is feeling like they're in that storm. So it's better to be true to yourself when you're in it than to be following somebody else and lose yourself in it.
Absolutely. Definitely.
Fabulous advice. On to our inspirational quote. Kenya?
You sound like a meteorologist there. Okay, so the quote is by the great Maya Angelou. And it says, I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. I thought this quote embodies the term resilience in general. I really just enjoyed this quote because um, life just happens and life sucks at different moments for everyone. But I think what really can change your life is your perspective of it, um, and just realizing that sure, while it may suck and while it may be hard, it doesn't have to change you or change who you are, the way that you live your life. And I think once you are able to realize that and see different things with that perspective, it really changes who you are. And you end up getting a lot more out of your life versus just kind of just sitting and be like, oh my gosh, this sucks. Like you can do something about it, and finding a way to have it help you and aid your growth versus just hinder you is it's a hard life lesson, but once you learn it, it's much easier.
Yeah, absolutely.
What does
I
it
think
mean by, oh, sorry.
no, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
What does it mean by I refuse to be reduced by it? Does that mean just like straight up, like I refuse to like change who I am to conform? Or is there something like different about it?
I interpreted it as
Or is it
like
just interpretation?
I I mean either way, but I thought of it as like something bad happens. Say, okay, let me try to use an example that isn't too sensitive. Say like a parent dies, right?
Isn't too sensitive and jumps right in.
Okay, it's an example. Say like a parent dies, you can either like live your life with the life lessons that they taught you while they were living, and to just appreciate their life and live your life from there on, trying to honor them in the best way you can, instead of just letting it like every day you're just remembering the fact that they're gone and versus moving on with your life. That's how I thought of it.
So it's like moving away from being a victim.
It's
Right.
exactly the word I was thinking about.
Yeah. And I think what it brings to me is like being able to look at what happens to you, even if it's not the best situation, and ask yourself what that is, what the lesson is in it, what you can learn from it to be better because of it, instead of being a victim.
Mm-hmm. I think honestly, I know, not to get too personal, but I know that, for myself, I've been through a lot the last 3 to 4 years. I know some other people who have been through quite a few things the last 3 to 4 years, things that could literally break you down to pieces. And it just, it's all about, it's like Alicia said, it's your attitude. It's how are you going to handle it? You're not going to be, to use a word in the quote, reduced by it. You're going to learn from it. It's a learning. Everything is a learning experience. If it's not going well, why isn't it going well? Is it something that you can control? Is it something that you've brought on yourself? Is it your attitude? Like, what is it? And sometimes some things just aren't out of your control, and you need to recognize that too, or just out of your control, and you need to recognize that too. And then just make the changes. Make changes. Use everything as a learning experience, whether it be good or bad, and then just take that and move on and be better the next day, and just don't let it break you down.
I think it's crazy and kind of awesome how we all low-key, high-key had very different interpretations of that like last part of that line. Kind of similar on the same boat, but different paths away from it. Anywho, well, now is the time that you guys can promote Resilience Grows Here. Socials, emails, websites, places to donate. Got any?
Yeah, resiliencegrowshere.com. And we are on Facebook, as well as Instagram, but the Instagram I don't think is kept up very well. But on the website, you can sign up for the newsletter, and that sends out information periodically when we have things going on. And also on the website, you can make a donation if you'd like to. We'd more than appreciate that. And all of the donations go towards our work with veterans and in the schools.
Cool. So you can find Nourish My Soul, which is Alicia's organization. You can find us at our website for nourishmysoul.org. You can find us on Facebook. Just search us up, Nourish My Soul. You can find us on Instagram at nourish.my.soul. Lowercase, not undercase, like I keep saying. You can find us on Instagram at From the Ground Up for our teen group, or youth group rather. Well, that sounds a little religious. Teen group. It's From the Ground Up, or From Ground Up rather. Oh, have I been saying From the Ground Up this entire time? So many realizations today. Well, that's awkward. So From Ground Up without the O. You can email Alicia at Alicia, spelled ALICIA, at nourishmysoul.org. That's lowercase, not undercase. These dogs. And you can listen to us on YouTube. Just search up Nourish My Soul, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor, Breaker, Pocket Cast, Radio Public, etc. Wherever you listen to it, just search up Radical Thursdays. Peace out, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, and non-binary Scouts. Have a lovely day.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.